It was pretty bad like a week ago when Arctic had that. Like, much of the state was out for Arctic. Not working.
What?
These two are- this is working. I don't have it.
It's a switch, but I don't think it does anything.
No, it's probably. That's not switching.
Oh. That's what I'm with.
Something wrong with it.
Really loud.
It just rolls off the low end
Oh, okay.
or flat response. That's what it is.
Well, I see it's 11 o'clock. Are we ready or not?
No. We're getting there.
All righty. We're all set then. We will stand and say the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Alrighty. We'll call the meeting to order and can I get is there any changes to the agenda? Okay, sounds good. Then we will look for agenda approval.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Thank you, Steve.
I'll second.
Thank you, David. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carried. On to the consent agenda approval. Same thing. Any changes or anything that wants to be pulled out? All righty. Get a motion?
Sure.
Thank you, David.
I'll second.
Thank you, Steve. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Thank you, Shar. Opposed? Motion carried. Public input? I don't see any public, so I don't think there'll be any input, so we'll close public input. And, let's see, on to the We already did this, so we're down to old business already?
Mhm.
My goodness.
And let me first start off the TFL development parcels in Farden Township. Let me first say that I and Mary, David, and I, or excuse me, Mary, Jeff, and I were at the Farden Township meeting last Tuesday night. I think things went well. I appreciate that both Mary and Jeff were there because of their more knowledge than I had on some of the stuff. I think it went, like I say, I think it went well. We heard their concerns, and I think we addressed most of them, and we'll just continue from there. But like I said, I appreciate you guys coming.
Yeah, and I do think that it was really effective. I think the two things that we heard loud and clear, there is a significant park that's called Ferris Park. It's a county park, I believe, and it is on 500th, between 317 and 315, and so they really don't want industrial or heavy traffic on that road. So sort of bypassing that park was really of paramount importance to not only the township, but also the residents in that area. And then the second thing that we heard is that their preference would be some kind of buffer between where it gets industrial and then where it abuts any of the residential properties. The most significant would be on that north portion that we have looked at as light industrial. There is, as 500th keeps going straight, there's quite a bit of residential development, and so having some sort of visual break between the residential and the industrial was something that they had talked about. So those were really the two things. There is no county zoning, and so they would defer to whatever would happen from a county's perspective. And they don't have a road ordinance per se, but they are working on getting standards in place so that the township roads would be built up to a standard that would be appropriate. So they are working on the road kind of question when it comes to that residential parcel, but I think that as we would move forward, we would look at building to that standard anyway. So the other thing is that because of that, unless we find out differently under a platting process, now I'm talking the housing side, that we would have to actually build the road at that time, or if we could just do something there. But as a short-term measure, I just, if we look at the housing parcel, I don't think we have it up, but if you can visualize, we have the one lower 80 acres that's almost split equally in half on 107. So if we look at the easterly portion, that side is predominantly wetland. One of the things that we could potentially do, and I think is a good alternative, is we look at putting 5 lots on that parcel that we can use it as a test. So the only thing that we would have to do is create the lots individually on that side, and then look at testing the development before we even do anything on the other side. So we could subdivide, parcel off. We're doing some checking to see whether or not the usable acreage has to be all highland, or if we can go to the wetland a little bit, even though, so that we get the right size lot, but some of it's wetland, so we'd have to make sure that the well and septic are on the high ground. So that's something that we're checking on, but from a first step and kind of a test market, that's kind of what I've been narrowing it down on for that housing section. The other, piece that we have to, really firm up is that on these housing, I think that it makes the qualification for, being for affordable housing. And it has to, we have to make a case to the county board based on a plan so that, we have to identify how this fits into a housing plan. We have the housing study that set aside the northern half, so we can use that as our documentation. But, and then the phase one or the draft plan that we would have. And I think if we just do a one-page kind of summary tying what we're doing to the housing study and how we plan on doing that, that we can make the request then to receive these parcels at no cost based on the affordable housing. And Jeff, I think, provided you with that information. So that's the idea for the housing stuff, is to just sort of dip our toe in the water, given that 307 goes right through the middle of the parcel. It's easy for us to do that without expending a lot of resources to see how it goes. And then we can kind of assess and figure out what happens on the second side, understanding that it would still, because it's all one parcel, it would still be under that affordable housing requirement. But it gives us some time to think about, how do we make that work in the best way possible. So, that's a little bit on the housing perspective. I'm gonna go back and talk a little bit more about the industrial, saying, hearing what we heard from the local residents, what seems to likely make the most sense is that we would look at keeping 500th as on the purple section until we get to 317, and then drop down, which would then, there is, right on the south side of the rail tracks, there is it used to be a fairly significant siding. You can see kind of the rail track has a big gray thing there. That weird shaped parcel right underneath it is also tax forfeit. So there could be a potential that we use that tax forfeit, and then if the Burlington Northern was so inclined, but there is plenty of room on the tax forfeit parcel to build a quality road that we would need from 317th to 315th, which would then allow us to access that lower part of the parcel and then move on. There's actually a couple advantages to that. Is one, then I think, the rail crossing is already accounted for, because we would already be crossing it before we head over. And I believe that the pipeline is to the north. So then we would have another, less concern that we would have to do. That entire weird shaped parcel actually goes from 315 over, past, all the way over, and it's 10.42 acres, so it's roughly 5 acres on each side of 317. We would only probably be looking at half of that. There's no reason to acquire the other side of it. But that is what we would likely do, and really the most reasonable way of avoiding the park, but still being able to take advantage of potential growth of all of the tax forfeit parcels that are to the north side of 500. So 500th has several county-owned and tax forfeit parcels there that if we build up 500th would have some eventual opportunity for future growth if the one that we're working on is successful and we continue to have need for industrial property. So that's the redesign, I think, that would really respond to the local concerns about the park. I have also talked to Mark Fuller, who was the one who did this initial design, and asked him about how we could incorporate buffers into our design that would alleviate or provide additional separation or appearance of separation around some of the edges of the parcels. So we are looking at what we could do potentially there. Again, because the action wasn't taken for that very south little jut that goes down, the option that has the loop road seems to be a lot less favorable, because I'm not quite sure how you would look at stopping a road when it curves around. So more likely, this would be the option that we would be looking at, where it's just a straight contiguous road and we stop it at the property, edge of the property, and then should we need expansion, we can go on, since we haven't secured that final 80 acres there. The two things is, tomorrow I have a meeting scheduled at Beltrami Electric with all of the affected utilities for this property. So we will be talking with the rail is going to be there for sure, Minnesota Power is gonna be there. I believe that Paul Bunyan will be there, so we'll be able to discuss what challenges that we would have, what kinds of opportunities that we need to be cognizant of as we're thinking about doing the extension, and what kind of capacities are there. So that meeting is ready to go. And then I did meet with a business who has some interest in locating in this area. And so we've had initial conversations. They have decided that they want to keep having conversations about what that might look like, and would have some interest in acquiring the 120 acres that's in the middle there. So they would look at that top hunk that they're sort of initially interested in. They also would have some interest in additional, more of a rail siding with a couple extra spurs so that there could be longer term parking of cars. So one spur probably wouldn't work in conjunction with being able to provide rail access to more than just one business. I'm cautiously optimistic about this potential business. I think that they have a ways to go, but if it gets pulled off, it'd be a pretty significant project. So it's really interesting, those conversations. Because these are parcels that would be for sale or redevelopment, the county would have to secure those. And the purchase price would be based on the assessed market value of those. Did you have the total number? I didn't total it.
We looked at last year, these.
Mary?
Yes,
Mary, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, I got a question. When you talked about them wanting 120 acres, so the top portion here doesn't equal that, so would they be taking part of the lower also?
No, they would get just that. It's probably, well, it is. It's 40 acres and then another 100 or 80 acres. So it's 120 if you do that entire parcel from top to bottom. Now they
Okay.
pull out some, but the thought is that they take all of it except the one that we're using for access.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
So question about the park, they talked about going over to 317th potentially to get away from the park, but that's the east side of the park, so you quite don't get away from all of it.
I think partly too, though, is they were concerned with kids on 500th driving their bikes to the park and stuff, where 101 or 317 is already a 9 or 10 ton road.
Yeah.
Big, big right of way and stuff like that. And I'm assuming that there's probably heavy trucks already using it, because there's,
There would have to be, I would expect that there's a few, using 101 in particular. The concern they had is if you look at the larger scale of the map, you see that really the residential is from 315th sort of and up. So really, bike riding is gonna be on that portion of 500. Not so much on, because the entrance, as I recall when I drove by there, the entrance is more in the center.
Yeah.
So it's not right along 317.
Yeah, it's on
So
500.
the bike traffic would stop before it would get there, is my thought.
That
You know,
makes
the-
sense, yeah.
You know, the other thing that could potentially be done if you're adamant about going 500 is you look at installing a bike safe route, you know.
oh, yeah.
So you could put in a bike path that would serve kind of the residential area, so that's another potential option. And probably would be something that we would look at a lot more seriously if 317th wasn't already built up to the appropriate standard. But given that there's this timeline and how we would have to figure out how to get across that 10 acres or the 5 acres, is that a meaningful way that we can make that happen? And so if it's something that we can't realistically do, then probably some kind of a bike path makes the most sense for meeting that safety need. So,
It's kind of right now at this point in the engineering phase, figuring out what works. 500 to 101 and across the bottom actually makes more sense in a lot of different ways if we can do that.
Right.
And then that really seemed to alleviate the concerns of the township officials.
Yeah.
I think one of the things, if this is gonna be an industrial development, certainly need to speak with the railroad to find out if the traffic going west of 101 across that strip of land, if they're anticipating the need to install a better crossing there, a controlled crossing, not just, oh, there's nobody coming, let's go. Are we gonna have to have stop arms and whatnot for a rail crossing if it's gonna be an industrial type development?
Good point.
And is there enough width in all of that property there that runs east and west that's tax forfeited to build the
yes,
desired road?
there's 60, when I was talking to Mark Fuller, I think he measured it and said that there's 60-some feet in just that little strip. So that would be generally, I think, he said 60-some feet. Anyway, I don't remember the measurement, but he said that there was more than enough space in that little strip to put in a 10-ton roller. So. What we did find out, that little drop down that is currently owned by Burlington Northern, one of the township officials said that it used to be a siding. And then he helped to tear all the tracks and the siding out of there. So likely, if we needed to get a little bit more property, the rail probably would give that up because they have no additional use for that hunk of land, the way that I understand. But thankfully, Burlington Northern is scheduled to be at the meeting tomorrow, so that's one good question that I can make sure I bring up with them.
So I have more of a question for Jeff. since 101 is a county street or county road, is there any chance that lost funding can be utilized to improve that road in any way that would benefit the addition of a industrial work area there, or proposed?
Yeah, how to fund the improvements from Highway 2 into this park are gonna be a research project, and they're gonna be a kind of a fast track one, if we get to the point of having a letter of intent.
Because I certainly know it's not on our 5-year plan, but,
Yep.
because this wasn't even a twinkle in anybody's eye until this started to get to this point, so.
There's 125 feet on the TFL sliver
Okay.
that runs south of that siding.
Okay.
And there is High Line, but based on what Mark and I looked at that, we couldn't find any of it on the county side. It really looks like it is south.
It's on the private side.
Yeah, so that wasn't gonna be a concern either, that when we brought that up, Ted, at the county, or at the township meeting. Upon further reflection, none of that power line is on that county section,
Perfect.
yeah.
The ATV trail is.
Yeah.
The ATV trail is.
I don't know if we want to give up an ATV trail.
Yeah, so,
It's a designated trail.
yeah. As far as the infrastructure funding, there's, I did mention previously, there's a few sources that we can look at. EDA, of course, is the big one. That is a federal grant program that will provide between 50 and 80% of the cost. And that would, look at probably the entire access all the way from Highway 2. So we wouldn't potentially or likely be able to build up all of 101, but the section that we would be traveling on as part of the entrance to the industrial park could be part of that project. DEED has a Greater Minnesota Public Infrastructure Grant, and then they have another one that's called Business Development Innovation Grant, or BDPI. That one is also an infrastructure program that if the business would qualify under that criteria, we could access that source for doing the build-up. And then the final one is also a DEED program. It's the Economic Development Infrastructure Grant. That one is associated with transportation, or MnDOT. A lot harder to access and a lot less available. But that one is another one. The thing that's gonna make all of these programs fundable is a commitment from a business through a letter of intent or some kind of thing that's going to provide that as long as you can do this, we're willing to locate there, this is the kind of tax capacity that we're gonna bring in, these are the number of employees that we're gonna bring, these are the wages and benefits that we're providing to the employees, and really does sort of put them on the hook. And then because of that, then we can make the case that in order to satisfy this business, we need the grant funds in order to bring in the infrastructure to make this all work. So that's really why there's sort of all of these things happening at once, is you need to start marketing, because we don't necessarily wanna use county funds just to build in a road, thinking if we build it, they'll come. Eventually they will, but we don't wanna put that kind of resource out up front. But we have to really be ready, because these grant applications do take time, and if we have a very interested business, we wanna be able to move at a little bit quicker timeline. The other real need for this whole thing is we have to make the purchase of the property, because we can't exactly sell property that we don't own. So we probably need to make a decision about whether or not we're gonna move forward. We have a certain amount of months to do that since it was pulled from auction. So, we need to figure out a plan of making that happen.
I wonder, as far as referencing back to 101, I wonder if the highway engineer has traffic count survey of that road. That might be something important, and then an anticipated traffic count. I don't know if you can project what you think the traffic count might be if something happens in an industrial sort of state, but that might be helpful. Even if it's applying for grant monies, they might want to know that information. I'm not certain it's available on that road, but we can certainly check.
Is it a piss off?
No,
Mary, when would you need to start working on grant applications? What's the deadlines?
Most of these are open funding, meaning that as soon as you have a project, you can apply, because they realize that these are really fluid. So we don't have a deadline to start working on it, other than how long it takes to go through the process. So, that's good news, I would say, is that until we really get a business identified and get that letter, that's when we really need to start working on it.
Okay, thank you. And then Jeff, what's the timeline that we need to approve for us to go to the state to actually purchase these then?
We have 6 months from the time that we withheld them from the auction in September, or in November. So we'll probably be doing that in March or April, unless we get some sign from Mary that we should be doing it quicker.
Okay, thank you.
Alrighty. I have one more thing to add if we're done with this so far. Going back to the residential development part, we're looking at developing the east side of the road of 307.
Yes.
The west side of 307, where of course that would be the next phase, I guess I could call it. I see a pine plantation that could be thinned. I talked with Corey Kimball, and Corey agreed that he said that yes, it could be thinned. And he said normally they would take out 30% or every third row. And I was thinking, Corey today said the next timber auction would be April. Corey said that we could do something at that point and have a stipulation where it's a 6-month sale, so loggers would have 6 months to thin that. For me, the biggest thing is if we don't thin it and it does get developed, I think the odds are pretty good that those trees, a number of trees either way, are just gonna get probably pushed up into a pile and burned. And I think it's a valuable resource that I would hate to just see burned. Let me put it that way. So I was hoping that maybe before the April timber sale, if we could make a decision on maybe having it thinned. I'm not, if this was my 40 and I was developing it, I would be looking at, you know, the dollars that how I could squeeze every penny out of this type of a thing. But like I say, for me too, right now, a lot of it is just that it's a resource there. And Tom, being a former forester and that, knows there's time and effort and dollars put into that plantation. And I would like the board to think about maybe, like I say, maybe we put that up for auction, and we may have time. If we're only gonna do the east side, that would give us time to maybe squeeze a little bit out of this, out of the west side.
I believe that the information that you got from Jeff earlier said that there was about $11,000 worth of timber value on there.
Yeah.
So it would stand to reason that it would make sense to do that, to recoup as much as we could.
Yeah.
Right now, especially since we're pausing, or that we have the potential of doing that, and then that is a benefit for
Yeah.
everybody. And I think that may allow for less cutting as they're looking at placing houses, because if it's a little bit clearer, you can kind of see where a driveway might go in,
Sure.
and so they might do a little bit more selective cutting as opposed to just going through and
Yeah,
cutting it all down. So I would say that that would be a really great idea.
good. And ideally, we would already have the road plotted out and they could cut that too, but that's, I don't think there's any way we'd have that, by April type of a thing, but, well, thank you. I'm glad I could bring that up and hopefully it happens.
And I think as far
So
as
Ted-
when you do a
Go
timber
ahead.
sale thinning, I think you can set the parameters of that sale too. So if a forester goes out there and looks at it and says, okay, this is the ultimate goal, how can we maximize the return out of this and still keep the forested
Yeah.
areas as thick as might be
Yeah, because,
desired?
I'm sure we don't want to wipe it out, because then it wouldn't be very desirable. But if we could take 30% out, I think that'd be great.
Well, even if you did it in such a way, like you said, if we had it platted to some extent, we could keep buffer between each of the lots, which would make them extremely valuable, because you'd already have trees on both sides of your property, so you wouldn't be, so, if we think through this and get everything together by April, we might be able to do that selected harvesting, so it really is, makes for a more valuable parcel all the way around.
And Shar, you were going to ask a question?
Well, I was going to thank you, Ted. That was an excellent idea. And wondering if the HRA EDA board has to do anything to recommend to the county board or to Corey, or is Corey just going to handle all this?
I think we can do that based on the conversations we've had at this point.
Okay,
Okay.
good. Thank you. Okay, I guess if we're done with that, then we'll move on to 6B, Cornerstone Operating Shortfall.
And I believe that this was sort of my fault, is I didn't get it on the consent. I was doing the agenda too late, so I believe the bill was already paid on the consent agenda. But I just wanted to call out that they did make a request for a shortfall. Most of it was to cover the general repairs for that apartment, the payroll of their own staff, and then some of the additional building materials for that. So that's what that was for.
Okay. And do we need to take any action? Like you say, I thought it was on the consent agenda.
It was already on the consent, so,
I think Tom and I already signed the check, so.
right, yeah,
So we're good.
we're good, yeah.
Okay, then, on to new business.
New business, so, as I indicated, we've got a bunch of moving parts as it relates to the potential of creating industrial development, how we make that happen, and one of the things that we need to start thinking about and putting on our agenda is a subsidy policy. We're required to follow the guidelines as established in state statute, and then to define what that is, but then we also have the ability to tailor this policy so that we hit the development areas that we're really interested in doing. So, since the internet is really great and allows us to borrow things from other places, I found a county that was similar in location and size to us that already had a policy that they had available. So I took that, and much of the material in the initial part is really dependent on state statute, so we really don't have to do a lot. Where we need to be thinking about is when it talks about what kinds of subsidies we'll consider. Right now, we don't have a revolving loan fund, so do we want to include that, knowing we will, or know that we'll have to revise this policy? The other thing that I think that we probably would want to say in some way is that we may consider price concessions of some kind, especially when it comes to the industrial parcels. So if it meets particular needs, we may consider some kind of below market price concession. It doesn't mean we will, but it means that we may. And so is that something that we want to list as being a potential price or a subsidy that we may want to include? Again, the public purpose, I think those are really pretty much exactly what we would be looking for in those kinds of subsidies, is that, you know, we want to retain or expand jobs, that we want to diversify and enhance the tax base. We also want to make it possible for unsubsidized development. So if you think about the building out of 500th and the other parcels that are contiguous, well, potentially unsubsidized development happens there organically just because the road has been built out. And so that's what that's talking about, is that we're creating conditions that allow for additional organic private development. You know, and we are making sure that we can achieve development on sites where it wouldn't happen but for the county doing something. So I think that those public purpose objectives are pretty good. The general policies are, I think, where we need to spend some time thinking about what our desires are and then how we would want to go ahead and implement some of these. Again, I think that generally they're pretty good, but these are really the policies of the county. So these are really where we need to be thinking about what makes the most sense. Is there anything that we can add? If there's some that, you know, give you a little pause, again, we can find additional resources. We can talk to Ellers about, because I'm guessing that they assist this, you know, county or local governments with creating and crafting these policies, so we can find out if these make sense. I just found something quick and put on so that we could start having these conversations, given the speed with which we're moving along with the development. I wanted to make sure that this is on our radar. I don't think at this point we need to take any specific action other than to find out if there's other information that you would want me to gather. So all of that through J is something that, you know, we really need to see if that speaks to us as a county. The other question that I had and didn't have the answer to was under section 5, what plans are already in place with the county? Because we don't really, other than shoreline zoning, we don't really have anything else. And so we need to make sure that what other plans are currently in place are reflective of how you think about your overall development, and then how you want to tie those other plans into this so that they don't conflict with each other. So I highlighted that so that we can make sure that whatever else is already out there and approved, that we aren't in conflict with that, or whatever else is out there, we may want to make some revisions because of something else that we're doing. And so again, that was something I wanted to call out to make sure that we paid attention to that as we were going through this policy. And then the other thing that really, you know, the one-to-one job, that's something that we can decide. Sometimes it's, you have to provide one job for every $2 that you get, or $1 for one job, and it, you know, or hundreds of jobs. So that's the nuance of that one. The other one is the minimum wage. I'm not sure when this particular policy was written, but as you know, minimum wage has increased significantly. So do we really want to say 150%? of the state minimum wage. So we'll have to figure out what that means, and then think about, you know, really what's the minimum wage that we want to achieve, and then how do we put that in relation to the state minimum wage? And whether or not we want to do any sort of inflator factor in there because of the increases in minimum wage that are going into play, and then considering that in 2026 is when the paid family leave
Oh, yeah.
tax hits all businesses as well. So again, no real opinion for you one way or the other, but just the things that we want to think about as we're moving through this subsidy plan. And what kinds of things, and then again, where else would you like me to look for resources that will help us formulate it? And then on the last page, the other thing is the fee structure. What fees do we want to request from businesses that are potentially requesting subsidies? You know, what makes sense? Again, in this case, they're based on the fact that generally TIF requires an outside consultant to really help you through that process. And there's a cost to the county, and therefore the business should have to bear some of those costs. The things that are less expensive, we need to do that. The revolving loan, if that gets started, we'd have potentially origination fees that we'd want to be thinking about. So is there an application fee in addition to that? And so those are just sort of that fee structure that we would want to think about as we're pulling this policy together. And I did not include any sort of sample applications. Not at this point, it's too premature to do that. But before we, you know, finalize it, we will have to consider the application process and what kinds of information. It alludes to it in that last paragraph on what kinds of things we would ask for. But the application will spell that out in a lot more detail, so.
I think it's a good idea to start the conversation, and this, of course, is for all of the county, not just the developments that we're looking at up in Farden Township, so I think it's a good first step.
And there was a couple things as I was reading through it. It was talking about retail. Under 5A, it asked that, or it said that business subsidies will not be used for on-site retail or service businesses. And just thinking through the dynamics or the county as a whole, that might not be an appropriate thing. I mean, retail might be appropriate for some areas of the county since we're considering county-wide. And so this does say unless it will result in those kinds of things, but it's something, again, to consider is since we're looking at a countywide plan, are we really limiting it to industrial or fairly significant development? Or in the case of a revolving loan fund, you know, do we put that on here? Then they would have to comply by these things. And do you never want to give a loan to a retail business? Well, it's probably not. So again, as we think through these things, that was one of the areas where, you know, a perfect example is the Nevis store that burned. So it's an existing business, it's not new, but they're rebuilding. If you had a revolving loan fund and they took advantage of that, it's primarily retail, it's not a new business, so would it really qualify under that?
It would under these
So-
conditions.
So, but just making sure that those are the kinds of things that we would want to be sure that we include, because not all areas of the county are necessarily industrial or heavy business development. But if we wanna make sure that everybody has the same advantages, we might end up here, and that's
Yeah.
fine. It's just as we prepare these, let's think through all of those scenarios.
I could see, excuse me, I could see where it gets a little cloudy, where maybe, say you manufacture something and then you sell it yourself. So you're manufacturing something, but yet you're still selling retail. Then it would kind of get, I'm thinking like, say, fish houses, crank down fish houses.
The other thing I was thinking about is that we have a high number of resorts. Well, is that a service industry or is it a business? And then how do you classify it? Because, you know, as we look at succession, you know, resorts, some of them are owned by folks who are looking to transfer that ownership. And so does this preclude a resort owner from accessing a revolving loan fund? And those in particular are what I'm talking about. Likely, we wouldn't be looking at any sort of TIF or abatement with any of these kinds of deals. We are really looking at our revolving loan fund. That would have a potential applicability for some of those kinds of businesses. So again, if it's okay that we don't want to do that, that's fine. We just need to think about.
So are you specifically visualizing or thinking of like some of the businesses that qualified for the Main Street grants and things like that? Because I'm really wondering if that's what you're thinking, if we want the county EDA really involved in that small lane anyhow?
Well, I'm thinking about all of the businesses who didn't qualify for Main Street. So the Main Street program was available to only businesses that are along a commercial corridor. So every resort within the county is ineligible for receiving Main Street resources because they're not on a commercial corridor. While some of them fared fairly well because of COVID, because a lot of people escaped the cities to come out to resorts, there could be instances where they would want some resources. Mostly though, I think that the succession planning is going to be the biggest hurdle that resorters are going to be dealing with over the next 3 to 5 years, is as businesses are looking at, resorters in particular, but a lot of businesses have been operated by people for a lot of years. And as they're looking at selling, the business is only valued at what the real estate is. Very seldom is there any accommodation for the goodwill of a business. And so for new owners to come in, it's very difficult to get the financing in order to actually purchase a building or purchase a business that's operating. Those are the instances where revolving loan funds, which end up being in those gap situations, can be effective. Now, I'm not saying that that's what you want to do, but I want you to think about whether or not that's what you want to do. Rather than making a decision one way or the other right this minute, I'd rather have you think about whether or not that's how you want your revolving loan fund to be used. And if you don't, then you've made that conscious decision and will accommodate it in the policies. If you do want it to have that potential, again, then we've thought about it, made that decision, and we'll have it in the policies. So our discussion today isn't to steer you in any one direction. It's really to have you thinking about, oh, okay, how are some of the ways that we could utilize our revolving loan fund? And does it make sense to do that? And is it what we want our countywide HRA EDA to be doing? And if it is, then great, and if it isn't, great. But let's then make sure that we've had those conversations and not made a decision by default. So.
Because I'm thinking more, the county EDA probably has to have a more broad look at things. I mean, if individual communities or nonprofits want to have those types of things where they drill down to smaller projects or tighter things, that might make more sense, but I see, you don't want to shackle yourself either, where all of a sudden something comes along that it's hard to know, but having some guidelines on there on how we would do it would be good.
If you think about a revolving loan fund and think about the county, the only place that has one is the city of Park Rapids. Now, our businesses also can access the Headwaters Finance Corporation, which is part of the HRDC in Bemidji. They also have the potential to access the Northwest Minnesota Foundation, which has a business gap program. And then in certain parts of the county, MMCDC is a community lender, and so some parts
I
can,
am.
yeah, so
Testing
some
that.
parts can access some of those. Again, and also the co-ops have some resources. And as we're thinking about resources in total, that's how we should be thinking about, you know, the subsidies that this organization has the potential to provide. And is it beneficial to have a revolving loan fund that covers the entire county or not? And then if it is, what parameters do we want to set? Or what other kinds of subsidy opportunities aren't available but for the work of the HRA EDA? So again, I can do some more work in finding other examples if that's what you choose to do, and we can kind of look at different iterations. Or, you know, having gotten the background of this material, you can read through it, we can put it on a future addenda and just talk about, you know, here's the heartburn things that I find are great, here are the things that I don't think are so great, and then we can discuss this with the goal that, in the back of our minds, knowing that before we actually get a letter of intent, we have to have this. So they do have to
Yeah.
continue to move along as we have the potential for future development.
It does seem like wherever you got this from, that, you know, in section 5A, they tried to write it in a way that didn't force them to say no, but they did set some criteria that have to be met, that some litmus tests to, it's gotta be big enough to make a difference, or it's gotta be new development, so,
But it's also going, in this example, go all the way back to 2. We are only talking about subsidies in excess of $150,000. In that case, 5A makes a lot of sense,
mhm.
in the sense that you have a revolving loan fund that's gonna provide business assistance or gap funding, and most oftentimes, those are gonna be in the tens of thousands of dollars. Those rules would be part of the revolving loan fund and not
You could do that,
pursuant to
yeah.
this policy. The biggest part of this policy is giving us some idea of how to proceed when we have somebody that's coming in with a multi-million-dollar project. What tools do we want to make available? And how are we gonna package that? And, how does that look? The reconstruction of a downtown business in Nevis would be more than $150,000. It would certainly meet the conditions of 5A
Mhm.
in this situation. But if somebody wants to do some exterior improvements to their building downtown, you know, and it's tens of thousands of dollars, and our revolving loan fund has funds for that and allows for that, it would fall under those rules and not. So this is a lot at one time, when we haven't really talked about it. The problem is that we're very likely gonna have to implement some of this.
Yeah.
um,
To start
to
somewhere.
attract- To attract somebody on a scale that we want.
You have to start somewhere, and, you know, if you find out it's not working for us, you make changes.
And again, we have not, as Jeff said, we haven't had this conversation, and so I just
Yeah.
sort of dumped a 5-page document on you with a lot of material. And I did that in hopes that we would have time to be a little bit more thoughtful and leisurely about the conversation. So, again, no action is required. We just, it is new business. It's something for us to just really start considering and thinking through, and may give you an opportunity to have some discussions with others about the applicability for our county.
One thing that would help me think more on this is if you send me a copy of this so I can become more familiar with it, and then just ponder it for a good while like you were asking.
Okay?
I guess one of the things I was just thinking about is we need to be careful if we're gonna start talking tax abatements, because the whole thrust of the thing is to gain more tax capacity and give relief to those areas where there will be something happening, so.
It's also very common for tax abatements to collect a portion of the tax and not all of the tax, so that you can accomplish both things with that, and that's where, 2 weeks ago, I went to the Elders Park Finance Seminar, and they spent a lot of time on thinking about how to finance infrastructure projects, and the tools and the mechanisms and the numbers, and if you, for instance, had a $10 million development and you took 25% of it and rolled that back into this. But the first and foremost, the price that we're gonna acquire those parcels at in a bundle is less than they would sell for if you sold them off as 40s. Right, so, and if you improve them in any way, shape, or form, the improved value is this. So the first discount we have available is related to the retail price of those parcels. Maybe enough. It may be enough, and it may be enough to use as leverage to link to state and federal programs that allow us to provide other things. General guidelines here is what these are.
So then maybe we'll, next month's meeting, just touch on it again, see if there's any more input and go from there. Good, good. Okay, if there's nothing further with number 7, we will go on to the director's report.
I have a few things to make note of as soon as I find my notes. So the power of attorney that we talked about for the payroll taxes has been approved, and so I've had initial conversations with the Department of Revenue, trying to get that sorted out. We are working on access through iSolved, which was the payroll provider. We can get 3 months worth for $125, which would allow us the ability to get whatever reports we need. So we think that that's more than reasonable and really necessary to do all of the research that we need. So Alicia has actually gone ahead and done that. They did tell us that they reported all of the 2023 payroll, but that's not aligning with what is being said by revenue. So now we're at least being able to gather that information, and we're working on it. The other thing I wanted to highlight, excuse me, is that Minnesota Housing has finally made movement on the Housing Trust Fund grants. The letter of intent will open on Friday and is due by February 11th. And then the full application is open on the 12th of February and closed on March 19th. So based on our initial contributions that qualify, if we are able to garner the entire thing, that would be $225,000 that we'll ask for. There is likely going to be significant competition for those resources. So what we actually end up getting is hard to say, but we will be requesting the $225,000 that we are eligible for based on the statute. And then just as an aside, as you may or may not know, the HLDC included 2 childcare units in the apartment buildings that we just constructed. And we have just now been interviewing or showing the apartments to potential childcare providers, and we're getting a lot of interest, so more than likely we will have that. Subsequent to that, we also submitted an application to DEED to help us with some of the last things that we need to do to make it the very best area possible, and that was awarded. So we have $100,000 that we can use to make the final improvements related to the childcare area over there at Pinecrest, and should make a pretty nice facility for 2 family childcare providers to operate out of. So we're pretty excited about that, and it's something that you can share that, you know, we're starting to work on childcare, and potentially something that we do here can be replicable in other parts of the county as well, so.
Would they have an outdoor playground and everything?
Yeah, that was what part of the grant was for, is to construct or provide a playground. And then to add a additional security door, and then to provide some of the durable equipment that, like cubbies and the little tables and little chairs, and some of those things that are really expensive for a provider to buy and start with. So the hope is that if we can get some of those more fixture kinds of things, that if a provider seeks to move on, we still have things that could start it to attract another provider, so.
Mary, I just want to thank you for your hard work and once again securing funding.
Thank you. That's all I have for the.
Alrighty, thank you. Well, it looks like we got a closed session, so if I can get a motion to,
I'll move.
I'll second.
Steve?
And what's the purpose for discussing
Discussing
real property?
value of real property.
So we are in a closed session now?
Not yet.
Oh, not yet, well, we're getting there.
Vote.
Oh. Pardon me, can I get a vote on that? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
I,
Aye.
Okay,